the chat box. Let me stress to you, we want to make sure that we are having a dialogue. We are here for a reason. If you're not able to follow these rules, then we will use our powers to remove you from the room. But I am confident that we will not have to use those powers today. Secondly, everyone's mic will be put on mute. But again, I ask you to help out. If we miss your mic, please go ahead and mute your mic. If you are on a tablet or a computer, you can look at the bottom left corner of your Zoom screen. There is a microphone icon. You can click on that button to mute and unmute. If you are calling in on a phone, you can simply dial *6. That will mute and unmute you as well. Here's one of my really favorite features. Today we made sure that we structured this meeting in a community meeting format as opposed to a webinar, where really all you get to see are the speakers. We wanted to make sure that folks knew that this was a community effort that we are leading today. So nonetheless, we do want to make sure that you are focusing on the speakers. And so we will ask you when we have our speakers to maybe switch from gallery view to speaker view. If you are on a tablet or computer, on the top right corner of your Zoom screen, you can see gallery view or speaker view. And you can just simply click on those tags to switch between the two. If you are on your smartphone, you can simply swipe left or swipe right. Throughout the program, there will be opportunities for you guys to ask questions. And at the end of the program, towards the end of the program, there will be an open chat, similar to the one that we had starting this program, where you guys will be able to unmute yourselves and speak. But as we go throughout the program, we do ask that you put all your questions and your comments into the chat box. The team of planners here will be looking through the chat box and asking the questions on your behalf. And now I'd like to turn it over to our moderator for this evening, Josmar, who is the coalition coordinator for GANGS. Thank you all.
Great. Thanks, Marquis. Hey, good evening, everyone. Thanks, you guys, for joining us again. We're gonna just first go through a little bit of the agenda. We're gonna talk a little bit tonight about the criminalization of association. The GANGS coalition came together as the outcome of meetings and conversations that were happening about gang policing in New York City. And gang policing across the country has become evident as we've heard more news from cities like Chicago and places as far away as California about gang databases and gang policing tactics there. And in some of those cities, we've seen scandals happen. In California, you had a lot of controversy around the state gang database there, Cal Gang. In Chicago, there was a lot of controversy around the Chicago gang database and some of the efforts made by law enforcement to deport individuals based off of their gang status. And so a lot of the issues we're gonna get into tonight are a piece of a larger conversation. What we're hoping to start off tonight is the first in a series of conversations that we'll have to talk with members of the community, to talk with people who've been affected, not only in New York City, but across the country, so that we can connect what we're doing here in New York City with cities like Chicago and places like California. And tonight we're gonna talk specifically about how the associations or friendships or relationships in predominantly Black and Latinx communities are used by law enforcement officials to create cases against them, to increase surveillance against them, to have harsher outcomes and proceedings against them in the courtroom. I will say, as someone who grew up in New York City in the 80s and 90s, there was a lot to talk about in terms of how associations in communities of color are seen differently in communities of color versus white communities. And when we talked a little bit tonight about how we all created our associations and through our friendships, we gave ourselves names. Gang labeling and the gang database becomes something that we get to look at how people are viewed differently in our society, not just by law enforcement, but by the media and by kind of society at large, into what associations are dangerous, what associations are criminal, and what associations can mean for people in terms of the criminal justice system. So with that, I'll briefly go over the agenda for tonight. I thank all of the facilitators tonight who helped make this happen. And I want to thank all of our speakers and our panelists tonight for joining us, and some, again, from outside of New York City. So tonight we'll start with a keynote speaker, Professor Johanna Fernandez, who will talk a little bit about the history of the criminalization of association and how groups and individuals were criminalized throughout New York City's history and have kind of become the precursor to the gang policing tactics that we've seen today. These include political organizations, radical political organizations that were surveilled for years and were targeted by law enforcement, and how that history cast its shadow on everything that we do today. We're going to then talk a little bit with some of our speakers, Afrika Owes, Vidal Guzman, and Kraig Lewis, about what it means to be gang related. They've all been affected by the criminal justice system in specific terms with gang policing. So we want to talk a little bit with them about what this means. What does it mean to be gang related? It's often used as a statistic, but we want to unpack it a little bit tonight, begin to unpack how that's used against people of color. And we're going to talk with two organizers from the Legal Aid Society's Community Justice Unit, Victor Dempsey and Germain Thompson, who are going to take us through a 101 or a training on the gang database in New York City. And then we'll move on to a conversation that Marquis, my colleague, will moderate with some organizers from Chicago, so we can again connect what's happening here to what's happening in cities across the country. And we'll talk a little bit how the beginnings of a national movement against gang policing are taking shape in cities like Chicago, Los Angeles, and New York City. And then we'll open it up to you. We'll open it up to members of the public who are here participating tonight, and we're going to have an open discussion with everyone for comments, questions, and a little bit of back and forth to talk about how some of these issues impact us. And then we'll close out for the evening. So with that said, I will, next slide if you can. Yes. Do we have, is Professor Fernandez logged on? There she is. Let's give her co-host powers. Great. So without further ado, I want to thank Professor Fernandez for joining us tonight. Professor Johanna Fernandez is an associate professor of history at Baruch College and the author of The Young Lords, A Radical History. Dr. Fernandez's Freedom of Information Law lawsuits against the NYPD led to the recovery of the quote-unquote lost handshoe files, the largest repository of police surveillance records in the country, namely over 1 million surveillance files of New Yorkers compiled by the NYPD between 1954 and 1972, including those of Malcolm X. She is the editor of Writing on the Wall, Selected Prison Writings of Mumia Abu Jamal, and writer and producer of the film Justice on Trial, The Case of Mumia Abu Jamal. So without further ado, I welcome Professor Fernandez.
Thank you very much, Josmar, for that introduction. And thank you, Marquis Jenkins, for the invitation to join you this evening. I don't have much time, and I'm a long-winded speaker, as you probably remember, but let's see what we can do here. I just wanted to talk a little bit about gangs. And by the way, the first chapter of my book on the Young Lords is in part about the transformation of a street organization in Chicago of Puerto Ricans and Mexicans known as the Young Lords into the Puerto Rican counterpart of the Black Panther Party. It was a Herculean transformation and a brilliant one. I think it's important to know that gangs have been a form of organization in North America, mostly around and built by ethnic whites. It's been the form of organization of ethnic whites, and you can argue that the mafia is a gang. In the post-war period, after World War II, when Black Americans and Puerto Ricans and Mexicans and Native Americans from the Southwest migrated to the city, they encountered gang formations of ethnic whites. And these organizations controlled turf in East Harlem. East Harlem was a third Italian, a third Black American, and a third Puerto Rican. Puerto Ricans migrated in larger numbers than Black Americans to New York between 1947 and 1960. And they landed in East Harlem, and many of them joined gangs ethnic gangs to protect themselves. They were reflecting what they found in the city. And in the context of white reaction to the arrival of Puerto Ricans and African Americans in this town, Black youth, who were often outnumbered by white youth, had to protect themselves. And they formed gangs. But these gangs in Chicago and Philadelphia and in New York had a political character because of the existence of racism. Automatically. Because if you were Black or Puerto Rican in this town, you were joining, and you were young, a gang because you needed to protect yourself against white reaction and beating. You didn't want to get beaten up. So racism in the city and the racism of these white ethnic groups and white gangs tinged these gangs that were also involved in petty criminal activity with a political dimension, right? Because they were self-defense organizations. And youth also cobbled together a sense of identity in these formations. Who are we? We have the right to live here, and this is our neighborhood too. And we have the right to defend ourselves. And in Chicago, that story is absolutely fascinating. Part of what I argue in this first chapter, which traces the life of Chacha Jimenez, the leader of the gang, the Young Lords, and his radicalization in prison in the 1960s. Part of what I discovered was that in Chicago, Puerto Rican, Mexican, and Black American gangs desegregated public space before the civil rights movement did. There were spaces in the city that you couldn't go to if you were Puerto Rican and Black American and Mexican, like the beach, like parks, like certain schoolyards. And these gangs, which were street organizations, they desegregated these spaces with brawn, literally. And I captured these stories when I interviewed them in Chicago. And those stories are captured in the book. Amazing, amazing history. What is important to note is that prior to the 1980s, gangs were street organizations. Its members were engaged in all kinds of petty criminal activity, but they were also social organizations for youth. Some gangs were politicized, like the Young Lords in the 60s. And after the 60s, the 70s, with the rise of the drug trade, And as we know now, drugs were funneled into cities through government institutions, right? We know that. That is now, it was once a conspiracy, but now it's fact, right? Now it's journalists, historians know that crack, that the CIA had something to do with funneling crack into the cities. With the rise of the drug trade, gangs become violent, right? But that is fueled in part by the drug trade, and high-level government authorities are involved in that, and that has a lot to do with international policy. We know that the CIA funneled funds to the Contras, a counter-revolutionary organization assigned with the task of overthrowing the Sandinista revolution in Nicaragua, with laundered money from drug sales. 3 minutes? Okay. I've spoken for 3 minutes, or I have 3 minutes left. I don't understand. Okay. Huh?
Left, sorry, 3 minutes left.
Oh, Lord Jesus. Okay. So that's a very important distinction to make. But we know that gang activity is not just about gang members. It's also about the cops and higher ups. We'll leave that there. What we know is that throughout American history, crime as we know it has generally remained the same. And historians and political scientists and criminologists know this. What I want to say is that in the 1960s, with the emergence of the Black Panther Party, which essentially under the law armed itself to protect its community against police brutality in Oakland, and it did so legally, the ruling class in this country went haywire. The Black Panthers was a revolutionary organization who stood for housing, decent jobs, decent schools, and the dignity of Black people in this country. They were also against the Vietnam War, and they considered themselves anti-capitalist. The US government launched an unforgiving campaign of repression against the Black Panther Party. And what it did to justify their imprisonment, and in some cases, the killing of Black Panthers in the streets by police, as happened to Fred Hampton in Chicago in 1968, 1969, was that they whipped up a moral panic around crime. In 1968, there was a crime bill passed for the first time in American history. This is what the crime bill did. What I'm trying to tell you is that this association of Black people and Latinos with criminal activity and gang membership is a repressive tactic on the part of the state to put down uprisings and rebellions. And if you think that this is something of the past, there are 6 Black Lives Matter activists in Aurora, Colorado, who are now being charged with attempted kidnapping right now for a protest they held outside of a precinct. This has a long history. In the 1960s, the US government, Congress, passed what was known as the H. Rap Brown Law, literally named after the civil rights leader, H. Rap Brown. And that law, passed in 1968, made it illegal to cross state lines to make a speech. It also passed the Omnibus Bill, which legalized wiretapping without a court order, but also brought into existence stop and frisk. It also made, I know that I have to end in a minute, it also made the cops immune to having to abide by the civil rights law of 1964, which said that if you engage in discrimination, you can't get funding from the federal government. The police no, you don't have to abide. You can continue to practice violence against Black people and racism, and you will be exempt from this law. What I want to tell you is that this thing we know as law and order was first deployed against the Black Panther Party and radicals and Puerto Ricans like the Young Lords, and they were literally imprisoned. It was a means of delegitimizing the uprisings of the 60s and criminalizing Black resistance. But in the 1980s, when deindustrialization eviscerated urban centers, that meant that factories left the cities to the suburbs, and what was created in New York, in the Bronx, in Brooklyn, was permanent unemployment, a pocket of young people who couldn't find jobs because there were no jobs. Then the government deployed that same war against radicals, against all of the Black and brown communities. And because if you can't address the most basic needs of the people in your society, you're gonna have to warehouse them. And they used law and order and the racist dog whistle of crime to justify the building of the apparatus of mass incarceration. And the war against gangs is part of that strategy. I will just end here with this final statement. Between 1973 and today, the United States has seen the largest transfer of wealth that has ever happened in US history. When it has happened, this transfer of wealth, and in the United States, it happened from the bottom of society to the top. That transfer of wealth has happened because of a military coup or a revolution. In the United States, that transfer happened and nobody protested. How are you going to get away with that? How are you going to get away with that massive transfer of wealth that is going to affect everybody, Black people, Puerto Ricans, other Latinos, and white people? You have to scapegoat someone in society. And so people of color, criminals, and gangs are the scapegoat. They're depicted as the major problem in society, when in fact, the major problem is that the ruling class has eviscerated the life chances economically of everyone in this country. So everything that we know about law and order and incarceration, the militarization of the police is the case because in a society that produces massive amounts of inequality, you have to scapegoat a certain part of a society, but you also have to keep the people who are more likely to resist in check. And who are the people most likely to resist in America? The descendants of slaves. You gotta keep those people under control, under lock and key. You need to bring them to heel. Those were the words of Bill Clinton and his wife, who passed, along with the Republicans, the 1994 crime bill. You gotta keep Black people who represent the cry of freedom in this country, as we've seen throughout history. They're criminalized most of the time, but one day they rise up, they engage in riots, and everybody listens. The world listens. Oh yeah, there is a problem called racism, and there is something in the soul that cries for freedom. And Black Americans kind of have the market cornered on that struggle for freedom. So gang raids are a means of keeping poor people, Black people, racialized people, immigrants in their place. And our communities fighting each other rather than fighting the people on top of society.
Thank you, Professor.
Great, thank you so much for that powerful presentation, Professor Fernandez. We'll actually now transition over to our first group to kind of build off of that historical backdrop. Thanks. I'll just give a very brief introduction, and I know that the speakers can describe a little bit more about kind of what their experience has been. But all three have been impacted by gang policing in New York City. So first, we'll start with our moderator, Afrika Owes. Afrika Owes is she works at the Center for Constitutional Rights, but was also impacted and fought back against gang policing in New York City. Kraig Lewis was caught up in the infamous Bronx 120 gang takedown of 2016. He's also an organizer and coordinator in the Bronx. And Vidal Guzman is a formerly incarcerated community organizer that has worked on countless campaigns throughout New York City. So with that, we'll just hand it over to Afrika, and you can start us off.
Thank you, Josmar, and thank you, Professor Fernandez, for providing that very important context that we still see affecting our youth today, but also that's so intertwined in all of our stories. So to start, I want to ask Vidal and Kraig and I'll also share myself, if we can give very brief overviews of our stories being gang-related or gang-associated. So Vidal, can you go ahead and start, and I'll let you know when you have about a minute left in the chat.
Yeah, thank you everyone, and thank you for having me. I think the first, when I started being gang related, I think it started when I started understanding poverty. So I was homeless when I was 5-6 years old, and I started selling drugs at 8 or 9 years old, and I started getting more active with the gang culture at 14, 15 years old, because of poverty, because of family members not, food not existing, and knowing that some of the role models around me was the same people in the same cycle. So was drug dealers, pimps, gang members. So I was a member of the Bloods for a long time, and actually went up in ranks, and decided to change my life a couple years ago. So I would say I started being in the gang culture around 7 years, but I've been home 5.5 years, still being watched by supervised by gang parole. Anywhere I went, I had to report in. Even if I spoke at Boston, I had to check in with Boston police, and Boston police had to check in and tell me what gangs it's where. So, that's some of the life or some of the things that I used to go through on a daily basis, being in the gang culture. But also, I think for anyone who has been through the gang parole, for a lot of people, they don't know what the gang parole is. The gang parole is basically anything can happen in your neighborhood, and they're happy to check in with you. Basically, if shootings or weapons or violence happens, your parole officer would check in and say, was you around them areas or around them 3 areas, or that area where that accident happened or that situation happened. So yeah, that was some of the things that I dealt with, living through the lifestyle, or being on gang parole.
Thank you, Vidal. Are you done? Okay. We actually have a minute to spare. Kraig, you can go ahead, and I'll do the same. I'll let you know in the chat when you have about a minute left. And thank you for sharing, Vidal.
You see, am I unmuted? I'm unmuted. Good evening, everybody that's in attendance. I'm Kraig Lewis, and I got hit by the feds. I got charged with the RICO. I got charged with drugs on the playground, school ground, guns, possession, discharge, and the whole 9, John Gaete charges. The oxymoron about this is that I was in grad school when it came and got me. I was preparing for my statistics finals on my last semester. You know what I'm saying? I was about to walk the stage, but I got hit by the feds, and I was a part of the biggest gang takedown in New York City history, 120 people. I wanted to be a lawyer. I got my degree in criminal justice, and I went back to get my MBA so I get more accolades, so I could get into law school easier, being a Black boy with braids and a scar. I already understood that it would be harder. It was already hard on me because I had a scar. But when the feds came and put me in jail, that made my life even more harder. I copped out to something I didn't do. I copped out to like 250 pounds of weed, which would have been literally impossible for me to sell because I was in school and I was playing basketball. Then I proceeded to be the grad assistant coach. So I was going in and out of the state, but I wasn't going in and out of the state on drugs. I was going in and out of state on school. They didn't really care about that, you know. When you get hit by the feds, it's a quota, 99.5 or 6% conviction rate. I didn't know that either. I was a master of the state law. I didn't know federal law, so the new law that I was learning, I had to learn it on the hop. I had to learn how to survive in jail on the hop. I was a school kid, never been to jail. When they say what is gang related, I mean, I grew up in a neighborhood where we all stuck together. We all went to school together, and we was a family. This is our neighborhood. This is where we live. We play in this park. This is our park. All right, we rap. We put a name to it. It's our rap group, Too Fly. YG, it was a team. To us, gangs were Blood and Crip, Latin King. So we created our own thing. It wasn't like we didn't want to be in that gang. We here with us. We start making music. The little kids following, our following get higher, bigger. I got a contract to rap on Apple Music when Apple Music wasn't Apple Music. And before I knew it, like, I landed in jail. I mean, I moved from New York, the bad neighborhood, the bad community. You know, I went to school in Connecticut, and I graduated bachelor's 4 years, 2 years of my master's, getting ready for a little, you know, across the stage, make my family happy and proud. The only black man in my neighborhood to even do that or attempt to do that. But now I'm back in my neighborhood. I'm working for RTG, community coordinator. This is my first real job. I help the neighborhood of 168th, and I help the kids around here. I help my neighborhood. They all look up to me. Like, no matter if I tell them I'm in a gang or not, they look at me as a gang member. It doesn't matter. Like, at this point, I was all over the news for gang stuff, and I'm here to change the narrative of what a black man coming out of poverty hood should look like and what he should do out here, what he should apply himself and do. Thank you for giving me the time to speak. I really appreciate it. And you can check out my story on YouTube. Write my name, Kraig Lewis, KraigLewis, or put Trouble Finds You on YouTube. I'll add the link in the chat. But if you want to know more about the raids, check that out. It's the biggest raid in history, and God is my witness. I ain't lying to you. I ain't do what they said I did. I copped out because I ain't want to tell them my friend. And now I have no more friends. Thank you.
Thank you so much for sharing. So similar to Kraig and Vidal, so I'm from Harlem, like Vidal. I grew up in poverty. Similar to what Kraig mentioned about gang related, you know, for us, going a gang was Blood, Crip, Latin King. We had teams. We had teams, or the projects had their own thing. And if you were close to a project, you were associated, but they weren't gangs to us. We were young kids that like to get fly, dance. A lot of people in Harlem, we used to dance or rap. You just hung out. We used to call it mobbing. So that was the culture that I grew up in as well. And the girls, we had our own thing. Sometimes it was like based off the guys. A lot of times we just, you know, it was just our own girl crew. I wrote earlier in the chat, my girls' crew was Material Girls. This is our symbol. And we used to just get fly. That was our thing. So back when I was 17, I was arrested with 15 in 2011. I was arrested with 15 other co-defendants. I was the only girl, and it was a case used by Cy Vance, who, for some political context, had just transitioned into the DA role after Morgenthau was the DA for like 2 decades or something like that, for a really long time. This was my case, was his breakout, okay, this is the new DA in town case. They had been watching us for a couple of years. I was dating somebody that they claimed was the ringleader for a gang, and it was a made-up gang called the 137th Street Crew. And to this day, I laugh, because if you're from the streets, that's just not a cool name. Like, nobody calls themselves that. Like, it's just not a thing. So I was locked up, and it was on the front page of the news. It made headlines because, like Kraig, I'd attended a prep school. I attended Deerfield Academy, which is a prestigious boarding school in New England. And I was kind of like the good girl gone bad, and they made it seem like we were running drugs and guns and all of these different things, and that wasn't the case. And we weren't in a gang. We all grew up together. So I live on 138th Street, and they said I was part of the 137th Street crew. That's crazy because to be in a crew is like I knew these people. We grew up. I go to the park on the block. I go to the corner store. So just by hanging out, just by being part of my neighborhood, I was roped up into this, and there were all these assumptions, and they basically blew the most extreme charge in the case and applied it to everyone, similar to what happened in Kraig's story. I was able to come home after, a lot of community buy-in, my church, my school. I had a really good lawyer who just really helped me, advocated for me, and they really wanted me to stay in jail. They wanted me to basically be the snitch, and there was nothing to snitch on. So after spending 6 months on Rikers Island, I came home, did about 2.5 years on probation, went away to college, and was able to separate myself from that. But with a quick Google search, my name still pops up. You still see preppy gun mole, moving drugs and guns. So I've had to work really hard to prove myself to people. And for a while, I wanted to separate myself from that, but I realized that's part of my story and who I am, and I've embraced it. And despite the fact that I became a Fulbright scholar, I went to college, graduated with honors, going to grad school, and I work at a prestigious organization now, I still face discrimination. I'm still getting denied apartments and bank cards and all of these different things for character reasons, right? And a person like me that has so much privilege, I think a lot about folks that don't. I don't have a felony. My record was adjudicated, but for those that have a felony, how is that affecting them? So a lot of my work is and who I identify as someone that lives on the intersection of privilege and oppression. I've been through a lot of oppressive incidents in my life, but I also know I've had a lot of privilege, and I'm always trying to use that privilege to bring voice to, the oppressive, the voiceless, oppressive voices that haven't had a chance to speak. So with that, I'm going to transition over to the second set of questions about gang related and what does that mean. Kraig, you touched on it a bit when you spoke, and I just mentioned it. So I'm going to pass the mic over to Vidal to, just give us maybe in a minute and a half, what is gang related? Or we're actually running out of time. So if one of the facilitators could let me know if we can have an extra 5 minutes. But Vidal, you can go ahead and describe what you think gang related is.
So gang related is, associating with a neighborhood, a block. That's what police might say. They might identify someone from whatever color they wear, who they hang out with, what neighborhood is they hanging out at. And also it's different between how the police actually categorize people. And even is different how knowing that how the prison system actually categorizes people too. That's something that we notice a lot of times. Anytime if you're looked at as, let's say I'm a member of the Bloods, and in reality, what that does is actually follows us anywhere, even from our being on gang parole, as I say now. So for under the police, identifying a gang member is someone, for them is a neighborhood that someone lives at, a color that someone wears, who someone hangs out with. Maybe that is a person that the police has been watching for a while, or majority of a history of a neighborhood that has a history of a certain gang existing for generations. So, I'll say the abilities for someone to identify, especially the police, they have many different methods. But yeah.
Thank you. I haven't gotten word back from Josmar or Marquis if we can get a couple of extra minutes. So I'm just gonna go ahead and.
You're good.
Huh?
You're good. 5 more minutes.
Oh, okay. So I want to go into how, Kraig, and I'm going to ask you this one. How do you think what you went through affected your family, your loved ones, and your community?
I mean, it affected my community hard. Like, it affected my community. We still affected. I'm affected. I go home. I didn't come home to any of the people I grew up with. I want to put this perspective to y'all. I had 6 years in college. Well, I put 7, but 6 years in college, right? That means I moved out the hood 6 years. That's a generation. 4 years is high school. I come home, all these little kids is looking up to me. I'm like, boy, I'm trying to put faces on bodies that grew tall, like, and I don't know these kids. You know what I'm saying? But they acting like they know me. And that's how the gang thing is to police. So if they come around, rally around me and I'm moving with them, they're gonna say, oh, all right, he's continuing the criminal enterprise, even though I ain't committing no crime. And I don't have to tell them to do crime or none of that. They are affected tremendously. The parents, the sisters, the brothers, everybody. Take one person causes at least 20 people to be affected. So if we all in the neighborhood, it's 120 people, that's thousands of people that's affected. I came home because I went to college. I'm the only educated one. Like, so everybody else is just toasted. Now, I know my time is running out, but I went to Mount St. Michael in the Bronx. It's number like 4 in New York, like Catholic, old boys. I went to jail, it was like Mount St. Michael with dorms, and I couldn't understand that. But I graduated from there, went straight to college. I had all the resources, baseball, football, basketball, track. I did everything. I still landed in the feds. No criminal record, no proof, nothing. They apologized to me, told me good luck when I copped out, and I went home. What happens to the people without the resources? What happens? No Catholic school. What happens to public school kids? I'm gonna leave it like that. That's why they need us to keep talking, keep coming together, keep rallying, and doing stuff like that. Because if I lived the white boy life and went to jail, what about the black boy that's living the black boy life?
Thank you. So we have about 2 minutes, and I'm just going to make sure to highlight the effect on women and girls, which is really important for me because often when we read these cases, most of the time it is Black and Latino men that make up the majority of the docket, and that make up a majority of the arrests. But women are affected by this as well, and not just by getting arrested. On the front lines of activism is always Black women. Leading the protests, organizing, is Black women. Going to visit folks in jail, Black women. It's mothers, it's sisters, it's aunts, it's girlfriends, it's wives, it's children. And the effect is deeper than just, a person going to jail. That's disrupting an entire family. And that's also documented in sociology and psychology. And even when they're looking at urban studies, why is this dismantling of the Black family the way it is? Because statistics show something like 1/3 of Black men will have police contact, and that can lead to arrest. So I think it's important for us to remember that Black men and Latin men are very affected by this majority, but Black women, trans women, non-binary folks are also affected as well. And often those stories are not highlighted as much, but Black women are the fastest growing rate of folks in jail currently. Right, and I believe Latino women follow very close behind. So it's important for me to make sure that I share that, as a formerly incarcerated woman, as a formerly incarcerated youth, but also to keep in mind on the other side of it, families are being affected. If you have a felony, sometimes folks can't go back and live in public housing. And that's breaking families up because parents have to make very tough decisions about where is my family going, where is this person going to stay? How do I care for this person? So it's important for us to keep that in mind as we think about this conversation of gang related and what it means to be a gang. It's deeper than the arrest. This is affecting communities. This is breaking families. This is breaking social bonds and ties, which is what we need in low income communities. We need to keep our villages together. So this is a systemic way that we keep people apart. So with that being said, it's 6:45. We're a bit over time, but I just want to thank Kraig and Vidal for sharing your stories and sharing your words. And if you all have questions, just pop them in the chat and we'll try to get to them at the end of the segment, and be sure to answer anything that you have. Thank you again.
Great. Thank you so much, guys. That was awesome. So yes, as Afrika said, if you have questions specific to Afrika, Vidal, or Kraig, just throw them in the chat box. We'll try to bring them up also towards our open discussion at the end, and you can also ask them yourselves when we get there. So next we'll just transition to a presentation by Victor and Germain from the Legal Aid Society. Legal Aid Society, the last couple of years, has been facilitating a very, very effective do-it-yourself FOIL campaign for people, community members, to be able to find out or work to find out if they are on the NYPD's gang database. And they've been also doing trainings and workshops across the city. So with that said, I'll turn it over to Victor and Germain, who are going to take us through a little bit of the basics around the gang database here in New York City.
Hello, good evening, everybody. As Josmar stated, my name is Germain Thompson. I'm a community organizer with the Legal Aid Society. We work within the Community Justice Unit, Victor and myself. And within this unit, we work with some sites that you just heard from Kraig. Kraig worked with these sites as well. He works with RTG. We work with kill violence sites. And with these kill violence sites, what we do, we provide wraparound legal services for them. But Victor and myself, in particular, we go around basically sharing information to the community that the community needs. And the gang database is one of them. You got it, Victor.
Good evening, everybody. Just introduce myself. I'm Victor Dempsey, the other community organizer for the Community Justice Unit of Legal Aid Society. You know, right before we get into it, it took us all day to kind of condense all the information to make sure we're getting everything out to you guys. But I just want to point out, you know, listening to Vidal, Kraig, and Africa's story for us, it always resonates with the work that we do every single day, because those are the folks who are being directly impacted. But I also want to keep the focus on second chances. And I think a lot of times we don't listen to that, because we just had these three individuals come up here who are doing great things in their community and by also turning it around. But a lot of folks don't realize that same thing that the professor was talking about earlier, of just the history of this title, just the history of this label that keeps us in a box almost. And then as Black and brown folks, when we do try to come together for ourselves or to fight against it, we're criminalized. So I really want to put a strong emphasis on the folks who always knew they can do great things and was afforded the opportunity, or at least had the resources around them to create the opportunity. And that's something that I always keep in mind when we do these workshops, because I too myself was gang affiliated. I also was locked up. You know, Germain has his own story. So when we get this information, please, if there's any questions after, we'll be kind of answer them as much as possible. But throughout anything, let's think about those second chances, because I'm sure there's a lot of young men and women who can use this time or be involved in this. Germain, go ahead, bro.
Yeah. All right. So the first thing we want to do when we start this presentation, we want to kind of give you a like a kind of beginning story of how the gang database came along. For those of you who are familiar with New York City criminal justice system, you might remember something called stop and frisk. So as we know, stop and frisk was deemed unconstitutional. Stop and frisk was when, you know, officers would go around basically profiling Black and brown people in Black and brown communities. And it's supposed to just been for patting them down for bulges and stuff like that. But they took that deeper and violated their rights. It was seen unconstitutional, so they got rid of it. After that, that's when Operation Crew Cut came along. And it's exactly what it said, crew cut. They went into Black and brown neighborhoods, specifically NYCHA areas, and went in there saying that, went in there basically surveilling Black and brown people, right? They use field intelligence. You know, field intelligence is, you know, undercover detectives sitting on the corner. You might see them sitting on the corner. They're just sitting there watching, surveilling youth coming in and out of neighborhoods, stopping for no reason. Hey, where you going? You know, they might see them and just you know, harass them like they usually do. And these are how people end up getting onto the gang database. So now when they're on this database, they don't have to have committed any crime. So that's where the field intelligence comes in. So they see somebody asking for their ID, now they got their name, they may think they're in a crew, so now they put them in this gang database. It's important to understand that they do not have to have any criminal conduct or criminal activity or even an arrest to be put onto this database.
I also want to bring up the fact, we have national folks on the call as well, and a lot of organizers who's been helping us get around this issue, not just locally, but nationally. Some states have had some wins, not even wins, but kind of codifying how that system works. Like Los Angeles, for instance, they now have what they call injunctions. Injunctions is a system where somebody had the bright idea to say, you know what, before we put these people on the database, we're going to tell them we're putting on, and they have their day in court. Me and myself being gang affiliated, it wasn't about doing wrong. It was about protecting my family, my friends, my neighborhood. But I never seen myself going into in front of a judge and saying, yeah, I'm gang affiliated, don't put me on. I just never see it happen. So in New York City, we actually had a city council hearing a few years back when we first started combating the database. And we asked everyone in city council and NYPD, when can folks get off? Why can't they get off of this? It's a tool of criminalization. It does not stop violence. It does not stop gang violence. What you're doing is using it to tack on extreme sentencing or, kind of coerce folks into taking plea bargains because you're trying to say they're the worst of the worst, which is BS, excuse my language. But that's really important because that was pretty much a lie that we caught them in. I myself was gang affiliated a lot of years later. I'm in my 30s now, and I'm still on a damn database. I don't know why, after everything that I've done. But that's a pretty important thing for us to know because there is no right to notice and no process for challenging the accuracy of the gang databases. Now, when we talk about the accuracy of it, the reason why is because that directly dissolves into the criteria of how someone in New York City can be found on the gang database. It's pretty much really, really broad, but it doesn't make sense to anybody. So there's 3 ways you can actually get on. The first one is if someone openly admits to being an active member or admitting to be part of that gang. I'm not going to say it doesn't happen, but it really is a long shot for folks to just come out and just tell them themselves. It is what it is. Another thing that we have in New York is what they're calling reputable resources. Reputable resources now, what we realized throughout our research is technically precinct personnel or intel, school safety officers, which in New York City, they're actually a division of NYPD, and also Department of Corrections and Department of Probation and Parole. So when we think about those 3 entities that NYPD also relies on to get their information, it's not like it's coming from some community group that's saying, hey, we need police because the gang violence too much. No, it's coming from another department that criminalizes Black and brown people. Imagine going to your schools and seeing these folks in there, and they're the ones telling you that your 14-year-old is hanging out with the wrong crew, but instead of pointing them into the direction of their guidance counselor within the school, they're telling their police sergeant, somebody on the side, that you need to watch out for this kid. So now he did not commit a criminal act. He didn't do anything to land him in jail, but we have his name in a database or a system that could potentially hurt him later on in life without his own family knowing, without any intervention being done, without any of the groups of folks like us to be there to assist this young man in correcting that path.
If I could just jump in real quick on that notice, because I think that's very important what Victor just stated, right? When it's a problem, it's a very big problem. And me having a son at this age, at 10 years old, Professor Babe Howell did a FOIL, and it came back that the youngest person in the database was 10 years old at the time, right? So me having a 10-year-old son is disturbing to me that NYPD would be surveilling my son at 10 years old to see whether or not he's in any affiliation with any gangs without notifying me or trying to do some type of intervention while doing that. Sorry to cut you off, Victor, but I just...
You're good, bro. Good. Great point. The last sector that we want to speak about is really broad again at the same time, but it's a lot going on here. Try to kind of condense it as much as possible. So we call this a 2-check rule, right? So what NYPD has now is a separate piece of their criteria where if they can check off 2 of the 6 boxes, then that means you can be put on the gang database. Mind you didn't openly admit. There was no other reputable sources that can say you are. They're just going from what they call field intelligence. So the first part is a known gang location. I really don't want to dive too much into it because of time, but a known gang location right now currently in New York City is considered NYCHA housing. This is what we call our housing developments, our projects, whatever. This is where all Black and brown people live mostly. So if you live in that neighborhood, you're automatically considered to live in a gang location or a hotspot. Another thing is scars or tattoos. Scars or tattoos can be misinterpreted a million different ways. Craig himself said earlier, you know, he's a college-educated kid, but he has a scar in his face. That doesn't mean he's a violent or negative person. That means he had some form of accident in his life, to me. But that can be misconstrued when you talk to law enforcement. It always comes with a negative notation. I have keloid skin. I can cut my skin by falling on the ground and it bubbles up, but it looks like somebody cut me with a knife. When we think about tattoos, I know one of the main tattoos that I think a lot of people who have tattoos have are stars. I know young women with stars. I know grown men with stars for different types of reasons. But that can also be related to a gang tattoo. There's a few of them out there. Association with known gang members or known crews. Just because, again, I can be that guy, like Craig said. They assume Craig was involved, and sorry to keep picking on you, Craig, but they know your story now. But they could assume Craig was once involved. Now he's doing great things in his neighborhood. He's hosting back-to-school events. He's hosting Stop the Violence events. He's hosting gun violence events. So he has all these young kids around him. Does that mean he's molding the next generation of gangbang? It doesn't. But being that they know of him and they live in that neighborhood, they can automatically be put on a gang database without even knowing. The other part, few other things are gang paraphernalia, which could be if somebody found any letters or writings or anything like that that could be misconstrued. Also colors. Colors is that thing where it's just stupid to me. It's literally every color on the rainbow from the NYPD's recollection. Every color, if it's a crew of you guys wearing it and you frequent it a lot, you're gonna be put in the database. I myself just went on a motorcycle ride not too long ago for Breast Cancer Awareness Month where almost 600 people had on pink shirts. We could have been a gang that day. It is what it is. The other piece to this, what am I missing, Germain? I'm missing something. Oh, we're gonna get into this next segment really quick. And this is the most important piece to us right now because of today's world, is social media. Social media right now is one of the biggest things that they use to surveil and monitor. Jermaine, you want to jump into it?
Yeah, so social media is something they also survey on the Operation Crew Cut. They have a whole task force that just sits there and trolls social media all day long. Now, I know a lot of people can relate to this, especially if you're always on social media. You see these weird Facebook requests come up or Instagram requests come up, Snapchat requests, somebody you don't even know whatsoever. But it's like an enticing profile picture and just make you want to know who that person is. And you end up accepting your friend. That could be an undercover officer you just accepted into your life, right? And if you're someone that's out there trying to gain a following, or you just somebody that just like to put up quotes on your social media page, quoting rap lyrics can put you in the gang database, or at least have you surveyed to be on the gang database. Having friends that's involved in the gang and you like their pictures can put you in the gang database, or have you looked at to be put in the gang database. These are the reasons why we practice, we always highlight this social media part, because we know our youth is so involved in social media, and that's how they get involved. They get caught up in these RICO cases, because the officers also, even though your page is private, they also can subpoena your page if they feel like you have some kind of activity, and get into your messages, get into your Snapchat. When you think Snapchat is it goes away in 24 hours, that is not true. A subpoena will get everything you ever sent on Snapchat, right? They will dig that up. That fight you recorded, when you had somebody, if they wanted to get that back out of Snapchat, they can get that back out of Snapchat. That's why we always tell people, when you're using social media, watch what you do, right? These are examples right here of a raid that happened in Harlem with the Manhattanville and Grant houses, right? These little quotes on here is four parts, and this isn't an actual indictment that you can look up on the internet. It was the Manhattan and Grant houses. I think it happened in 2014, if I'm not mistaken. These are actual quotes from people that got caught up in this big sweep and federal indictments, and these are the only things they said. The first one you see somebody say, "I love MHB," Manhattanville houses, right? That's where they stayed at. You know, they came up with their little crew name, right? Does that make them a gang? And he also said Free Nino. That got him caught up in an indictment just by him putting that on social media. You see another one where Mr. Khalid Miller, he messaged somebody privately in the messenger, but they got the subpoenas to get it. He said to this man, "I don't want nothing to happen to you. I'm gonna kill one of these out here." These things got him caught up in an indictment, right? So we always tell people to watch what you do on social media. Watch the things you say on social media. No matter if you meant no harm about it, things can be interpreted any way they can. And it's sad that we have to tell our youth that, being they so involved in social media. These little things like this, getting people caught up in indictments, is ridiculous to me. Just because I said I love where I'm from, right? Just because the housing projects that I'm in, I love where I'm at. So that brings us to the steps to prevent you from being on the gang database. We don't want to tell our youth to limit the use of social media, but what we would like to tell them is that be careful about who you let onto your social media, right? Keep all your social media pages private. Do not accept friends that you don't know, right? But if you are out there and you're trying to be a blogger, a YouTuber, and you want the following, watch what you put up. You know, be smart about everything you put up on it, right? Avoid fictional accounts, right? Don't just accept anybody onto your accounts, right? Don't pose or pretend to be gang members. You know, we see people out here that want to follow, you know, the rappers and stuff. So they throwing up signs that they see. And a gang sign is one of the criteria to get you put on a gang database, right? Watch the signs you throw up. We've seen wrestling signs like the Wolfpack sign that's in the WWE. That can be interpreted as a gang sign, right? Try to avoid as many photos as possible. Listen, I know that's hard to do, being somebody that's always on social media, but you having friends that might be affiliated or known gang members, you taking pictures with them can get you on the gang database. As I said, use strict privacy settings, remove references to crews, gangs, rivalries. All these things sound ridiculous, but this is what gets you on the gang database. This is why we're here, to give you the information so that you understand the things that you can get on the gang database. The reason why you can get on the gang database, and the reason why we need to try to dismantle it.
Thank you, Jermaine. Really quick beat before we end out this segment. I do want to tell folks, you know, we didn't have so much time, but there's a lot of collateral consequences that come with labeling, not just criminal proceedings. In our research with this coalition now, we've realized that it affects families, like Afrika was saying earlier, the folks who's left behind. Like Kraig got locked up in that raid. And again, Kraig, sorry to keep picking on you, bro. But when he got locked up there, now his mother has to help him fight that. She has to figure out, am I bailing him out? Am I paying for a lawyer? Am I doing this? Am I taking off the days of work to be at court and make sure things go right? It happens. But also, unfortunately, in New York City and NYCHA, a lot of our families sign lease agreements. They sign these agreements on things they should not do while they live in public housing. And unfortunately, gang affiliation is one of them. So if your loved one is charged with being affiliated to a gang, not saying he committed a crime, just the assumption that he possibly did, even though he's fighting that case, NYCHA can send a permanent, what they call a permanent exclusion letter to that family, where the family has to make a choice. If this loved one is let go, they either can't come live there with the family, so now we've just displaced a young person, or the family has to move and relocate. That's a terrible thing to have to deal with. We've also been dealing with immigration status. It affects that as well. Immigration right now, where we've had a big issue with ICE coming into the courts and dealing with folks. So the collateral consequence and the intersectionality of how many ways this label alone can affect the person is tremendous. So it's not only about someone getting locked up. It's really about the circumstances that comes with it. I do want to open back up to the chat. I know that was a lot of information in a very fast time. and it was weird on me because it's not normally how we do things. But I hope we can share again. And if anything, other additional information that we can provide, feel more than free. We're going to open the chat now for, I believe, 4 more minutes. Then we'll move on to the next segment. Josmar?
Hey, yeah. So, yeah, I think we have a time for like a question or two. So specifically on the database section before we move on. Is there enough time, Marquis, Vic? You have time for one question?
We've got about few more minutes for the segment, so we got to move on.
Okay, so if people want, they can either raise hand feature to ask it, or they can throw something in the chat box, anything in particular to the database. And keep in mind that the way that the database runs in New York City is here. There are databases in cities across the country, so there are some similarities, but there may also be some differences. So any questions from anybody? If you want to use the raise hand feature, or you want to put something in the chat box about the database, how it works. Victor mentioned you can't really get off, at least in New York City. Okay, I'm not seeing any questions. If you...
Professor Johanna?
I'm just wondering if there are any lawyers here.
I believe
there's a few lawyers on.
I'm wondering if the hand shoe rules apply at all here. Or what's the relationship between RICO and hand shoe, and does hand shoe have any jurisdiction over the rights of people's right to association?
Is Babe on? I believe Babe's on. There she goes.
Got a couple of really great lawyers on.
Here's Babe.
Yes, I'm here. I'm a professor at CUNY School of Law and did the Bronx 120 report and did most of these foils, not the legal aid ones, which are awesome, but about hand shoe, that was one of the first questions I had when I started looking into it, but it is really limited to situations in which there's no suspicion of criminality. So since they always say that they're investigating and collecting this intelligence on gangs because they're concerned with criminality, hand shoe doesn't apply. That's for strictly like political and other organizing, but nothing criminal can be involved. So yeah, they get around that.
Thank you. I got India with your hand up. Did I say that correctly? Forgive me. Can someone unmute India?
I'm looking for her now. Oh, got it. Okay.
Thanks. I just wanted to hear about any challenges to these databases, because you know, I can think of some ways that these might be challenged, and I'm just wondering, you know, what's happened in terms of litigation, whether First Amendment challenges or, you know, due process or whatever the case may be.
Yep.
Sure. Do we have any other lawyers on the call who would like to weigh in about perhaps maybe any input whatsoever? I'm trying not to pick on people I know are lawyers on the call, but I will.
Well, I'll start in case somebody wants to jump in. Well, as you guys know, I work at Legal Aid Society with some attorneys. I mean, we have been looking into it with the coalition and trying to figure out, you know, what First Amendment rights are being violated. Like we say too, when we do these workshops, we don't want to tell folks not to write something, you know, and violate the First Amendment right when it comes to social media. So how do we say, you know, what can be articulated as a criminal post or something like that? Like, what gives NYPD authority to say? And we've been trying to find the connections between it, because really it comes from where they try to paint this picture of it's kind of a dragnet of sorts, right? It's something started here. There was a fight 2 weeks ago in a park somewhere, and now they're tracking these kids because one kid is posting something about, oh yeah, you know, this is what happened, and now they're going to check in the school. So there has been a lot of instances where we're not 100% sure, to be quite frank with you. The coalition now who's put this webinar together, we've been doing everything we can to FOIA request information, and Babe has helped lead us in that. But it's like this black shield or blue wall, rather, that we're up against where we can't even get the information through the Freedom of Information law. And what we've been seeing now is, I think the best thing we've heard was in the hearing that we had at City Council was NYPD blatantly saying, these are non-routine techniques and procedures. Almost every single FOIA request Legal Aid has submitted with community members, that's pretty much the language we're getting back. Non-routine techniques and procedures, they're not acknowledging the FOIA requests at all, and no information is coming back. I want to say out of the 500 or so FOIA requests we've done, we've probably got 3 solid answers. And unfortunately, I don't know if Germain wants to tell you about it, but Germain was one of them. And it's not that he's on the database, it's what he's seen that prompted us. So I don't know if it answered your question really, but I will say right now, we have some folks on the call that would love to hear this, and we're fighting against it now, or trying to. But Germain, you want to give them insight as to what you're saying?
I'll do it real quick because I know we're a couple minutes over time. So when they sent the FOIA request back, what stuck out to me was that I called NYPD because it was a hit and run on my car. My car was parked on Gates Avenue in Brooklyn, and somebody hit my car and they ran off. I called NYPD. They came, did the police report. I never knew this happened. This happened back in 2008. It happened. I never knew they did this. When I got the FOIA request back, I noticed on that incident report that it had the checkbox of yes and no. And on that checkbox, it said gang member. And it had a checkbox where they could check yes or where they could check no. Now, this is just me calling them for an accident. Why is that there if I'm calling you for assistance? And this is on your regular police report. So that means when you come out, I could have been just getting off, and I'm in construction work. I got a bandana on my head because to protect my head from my hard hat, and the bandana just happened to be blue. And I call you because of accident. You see that bandana, you just checked on there that yes, he's a, and now I'm on the gang database.
Babe, Babe, let me just add one quick thing, because I think, and correct me if I'm wrong, India, what I heard at the root of your question is, what do we have on our side to push back and defend and to end this database? And we do have a team of lawyers, and there are civil rights law firms that are doing research to figure out what the legal claims are. But this battle is going to require a multi-pronged approach. And that's precisely why this coalition exists. This coalition has members who are part of the legal community, who are part of the academic community, who are grassroots organizers, who are directly impacted. It is filled and diverse with people, and we're thinking about it, right? The courtroom is about the laws that exist that are on our side. We might come to a place where the law is not on our side and we need to push for new law. So we are looking at every strategy to beat back this attack on our community.
Let's take Babe, and then we have to move to the next segment, guys.
Yeah, I mean, so there are a couple of obvious constitutional challenges. One is equal protection. The database is about 99% Black and brown. The challenge with that sort of argument, I think, can be met because you have the Proud Boys, you have Mafia, you have motorcycle gangs, you have white gangs that would fit the description. But it's still one of those situations where, like the stop and frisk, it will take you years to get there. And then you will get probably some sort of consent decree, et cetera. We'd like to see the database abolished. In making a due process argument, the danger is that they say, well, what process should you get before we put you on the gang database? You know, we'll give you a notice and a right to appeal. In other states where they have that, you can appeal to the police department. The First Amendment issue is one where the law has distinguished between First Amendment rights to association for religious and political purposes versus other ordinary kind of friendships, which I think is a mistake in the law. So there's a lot of ways in which this may very well in the long term give rise to a more robust sense of what our rights should be. We've given a lot of them up for an illusion of safety or security or whatever, but especially given the federal bench right now too, like the most important thing we can do is organize, change the rules from the bottom up and have no gang databases and prohibit law enforcement on a state law level from collecting this information or sharing it in order to protect our youth, as opposed to trying to get a court to order all that, because it's going to be a long process and then they're just going to shift gears and start collecting some other way.
Great. Thanks, babe. So actually now, if you guys have still have thoughts in your head, questions in your head, just put them in the chat box. And we will also open it up to open discussion after this next segment. So I'll actually just introduce the moderator who helped us open up in the beginning, Marquis. He'll be moderating a discussion on the national movement against policing, and he'll actually introduce us to the two guests that we're happy to have here from out of New York City, I think, Chi-Town. So Marquis, throw it over to you.
Chi-Town is in the house. Carolina, how you doing? Carolina is from Chicago. Hey, look at all my peoples. It is so good to see all of you. And I am excited that you are here today. So Carolina, I'm gonna actually throw the mic to you and actually have you coordinate your folks' introduction. So can you I wanna hear from everyone in Chicago. Who's joining us? You gotta go on, you're on mute.
Okay, now there I am. Okay, hello everybody, can you hear me or is there an echo? You can hear me, okay. Well, today I've asked Imani, who was with us, started our work when she was in 6th grade. So it's about what, 4 or 5 years ago? No, more.
No,
Shoot.
10 years ago.
10 years ago. So some of the youth, some of you all met back in New York, I think it was like 2 years ago. Couldn't make it tonight. Hold on, Courtney. Sorry, I'm at the office and our office is people popping in and out all the time. So, so I asked Imani to join because she was part of this work and how much time do I have? How much time do we have?
We're gonna go to a little over 7:30, a little past 7:30.
Okay, so partly I can start a little bit with Blacks Together. We're a community-based organization. Much like, you know, our work is really rooted around the work of the Young Lords, the Black Panthers, and the Rainbow Coalition. So a lot of the work we do today is really rooted in their lessons, and a lot of them are like Omar Lopez, who was the Minister of Education, and some of the old are still our mentors here in really setting our goals and really our strategies and how we move forward in the community. We're very much a neighborhood organization. We're located on the west side of Chicago. I don't know if people are familiar with Chicago. I didn't know the west side. The west side is the best, so don't nobody tell you anything else. But anyways, the west side is a beautiful neighborhood, right? It's a beautiful neighborhood. And particularly West Summer Park is really a neighborhood that is changing due to a lot of economics that is happening, but it's being gentrified, but it's primarily a Black neighborhood. And I would say within the last 10 years, there's been more of an influx of Latinos moving. And Chicago, not at all like New York, is one of the most segregated cities in the country. So if you know Chicago is really like, you have the Mexican neighborhood, you have the Puerto Rican neighborhoods, you have the Black neighborhoods, and there's a lot of little intersection. So that's what we are here. And West Summer Park is not only, it's a poor community, it's an over-criminalized community. So part of our work at Blacks Together was really around how do we improve the quality of life? That's our basic mission. How do we improve the quality of life for residents in this community, right? And all we do is we're basically a community organizing group really rooted in popular education. So most of us are popular educators, and the people that lead our campaigns are those directly impacted. That's kind of a little bit about who Blacks Together is. How we came about to the work around the gang database came about my son, 4 years ago, was put on the gang database because he was late to school. So much like in New York, the SROs are cops. They're cops in schools, And this has been part, I think, Imani, when she started with us about 10 years ago, was part about how do we change the student code of conduct. As part of the student code of conduct was what was pushing our students out. They kept on talking about dropouts. Or like, our children are not dropping out. Our children are being pushed out by your policies, right? So that's really how we began to look at the different practices and policies within the, in particular within the Chicago school system, around where some practices and policies that were criminalizing our students, right? So with my son, when I found out that because he was late to school, his biggest crime, he's lazy, right? He can't get to school on time, right? But because he couldn't get to school on time, he got put on a gang database that he got charged for shooting somebody. He didn't even have a jaywalking ticket, but for me to get him out, so I always say, they kidnapped my son and I almost had to have $1 million to get him back. So long story short, I moved heaven and hell. You can imagine, I was like, that's my only son. He was 17 in that crucial age where they start taking our boys. I was not gonna let him go down for something he didn't do. But much like you've been doing, we used the FOIA, because it didn't make sense to me that this kid who pointed him out and said, that's the kid that shot me, right? The case got dropped. Like, we went in there, we were all convinced he was gonna get indicted. They're like, it was the victim that pointed you out and said, this is the kid that shot me, right? So Nico, you're going down. We were getting ready for that. But it got dropped, so I'm like, there's something fishy with this, right? So then when we did the FOIA, I looked at his record and I found out that he was in a gang database. And what made me like, look, I grew up with the Latin Kings all my life, right? So my son was charged of shooting a king and being part of an opposite gang, right? So, and the only reason he was there was, and the only reason I knew was the school he went to was in 2-6, which was the gang that he was affiliated with. He was put as a 2-6, and I was like, how? So the more we digged, it was like, okay, they gave him this contact card at school because he was late. And they designated him a 2-6 because the school was in that gang region of the 2-6. So, Blacks Together, everybody, we mobilized, but we realized when we were doing this for Nico, that a lot of our youth, a couple months later, one of our youth is actually spent 3 years in jail. Same, this young man was ready to go, a scholarship for robotics, graduated from the local school. On his way in October, he gets picked up, charged with murder. We find out also he's on the gang day. So then we started seeing that this was a tool that they were using within schools. And this is when really we began to organize around doing FOIA parties, to making sure that, so that children could find out if they were on the gang database or not.
Yeah, but before we go a little bit deeper into sort of how it plays out, I am interested from one of your folks about sort of how it showed up in school. I mean, I know you're telling us from your son, it was because he was running late, but what are some other ways it show up in school?
I'm gonna share some more for you. Imani, you can share some of what she went.
Yeah.
You have to unmute.
There you go.
So can everybody hear me?
You can actually hear you through Carlos' mic. So
okay. Yeah.
Turn yours on, Caro. Turn yours back on.
Turn it back on?
Yeah, and then you turn yours off. I think we heard you clearer then.
Can you hear me now?
But turn your mic, actually turn your mic off so we can hear you.
Yours off and come talk over here. Yeah.
There you go.
Yeah, we're too close to each other.
Okay, can everybody hear me now?
Perfect.
Okay, great. So hi, I'm Imani. She kind of gave you the synopsis. I started Blocks Together 13 years old. I just turned 23. So it's been a long time coming. I've been a part of West Humboldt Park my entire life. So I grew up around gangbangers too. My dad, my uncles, it's followed me my entire life. So in my high school specifically, we had like a mini police station where I've been physically handcuffed to a chair in my school for hours, waiting for my dad to come pick me up, okay? So in the school, it's not just only being late. It was because my cousins were gangbangers and they would see my cousins picking me up from school. That's affiliation because my cousins would pick me up, and some of the officers who worked at the school have been officers who have stopped my cousins. As officers, it was from stuff like, somebody on the gang database because they started a food fight in the lunchroom my freshman year of high school. And that's how it started. If you go all the way back to elementary school, when I was in Cameron, it started there as well. It started with if you were expelled from Cameron. So Cameron at that time had like one of the highest expulsion rates for elementary school. This is K through 8th grade. So they were expelling like 3rd, 4th, 5th, 6th graders. So expulsions, that could get you if you somebody's dad was a gang banger and he came to the school, that got them kind of red flag. So like it was just like all of these little things. I haven't checked for myself personally to see if I'm in a gang database. It actually makes me a little nervous because I feel like because of all my affiliation, I'm there. Like people have come up to me and been like, oh, you know, you're Swan's niece. Like I don't even know that they are. I've had cops stop me and be like, I know you are. And I'm like, what? They're like, oh, you're Swan's niece. What? How do you know that? I don't know that. So how do you know that, you know? So it's that, it's like out here, like it runs that kind of deep. It's like everywhere we go, everywhere I've went my entire life, I've been stopped, I've been harassed, I've been approached, I've been pulled over for walking from the dance practice, from walking from the parks, constantly because of this affiliation that I had no idea about, this legacy that I so was supposed to carry on. But I left for college for 4 years, and then I came back, and now I'm back working again. And a couple days ago, I'm walking to the office, and the cop pulls up like, "Oh man, how's your dad? How's your dad doing?" What are you talking about? Stop asking me about that. So it's like it's all these like normal teenage things, normal youth things that we were doing that was getting us caught up, like walking in big groups or walking at nighttime, or playing cops and robbers. We got pulled over multiple times for playing cops and robbers late at night, like on our bikes and stuff like that. So it was things like that that got me interested because I started to notice, like, as I got older, a lot of my friends were trickling away and like getting stopped and being incarcerated over nothing. And I didn't understand why. So started with Gato and started asking those questions. And I was just like, we got to figure this out. And then we learned about the gang database.
That is a perfect segue. I am interested in how you guys have been fighting against this, both so that we can talk about how we might be able to compare strategies, and also to begin the conversation of what does the national fight look like. So maybe another one of your speakers can tell us a little bit about how you guys are fighting back against this in Chicago.
One of them had to leave, but I can share like some of the gains is the last time we were together. I think, we were part of the class action lawsuit. As of March of 2020 in Chicago, they made some changes to the gang database. They don't call it the gang database anymore. They call it the police department's new criminal enterprise database. Okay, so like I think somebody said, it's not a win, it's a step, right? So since the last time, we have been fighting to do away with the gang database, right? So at the state level, actually our youth, some that you met, Tayana and Ayana, were part of designing legislation at the state level to erase the gang database. The legislation didn't go through, but what did happen was there was an audit. There's been an audit made. So with that, that led to was the Inspector General doing a whole audit and inspection of the gang database. And the conclusion was, from the Inspector General, was that the gang database is a biased tool, racist tool, that it was not, and it was inaccurate, and that in no means there was a useful as a tool to reduce crime, right? So part of that, and then we had a new administration, Lori Lightfoot came in. So part of her whole reform thing, so now is they give you an opportunity to contest. So they notify you that you're being put in the gang database, and you, much like you can contest it, right? So every 5 years, they're gonna purge it and to clean it up, because here there have been people that were 103 years old on the gang database still. There was children on the gang database. So that was one of the things that we, I guess, a step that we're taking forward. So now it's gonna be purged another 5 years. Now you have an opportunity to contest it. It will not be shared with ICE. It will not, So part of our biggest thing was not to be shared with ICE or other agencies. So it definitely, they said they will not share with ICE. The other thing is that if any other agencies want to use it, they have to request it. And in order to be put in there, there's different criteria. It sounds good, but we don't believe it. We don't believe that this is now we get to, take a drink and go home. Yeah, we won. No, right? So that's what we're saying, that this is a step forward for us, is to do away, because I know what way we understand that this is a racist tool, as another tool to criminalize our communities. And it's impacted not only our schools, but our families. Part of who I wanted you to speak with was our family organizer. How it also impacts not only with the job, but also with DCFS, right? So part of our family campaign is keeping the Black family together. And what have been some practices and policies that have been used really to the demise of the Black family. And so one of the things that we've been working on was some of our members were impacted by DCFS. And when we found out, so they were using these also gang designations and criminal backgrounds to justify taking their children.
Let me go back actually to the IG report. I mean, that is something that we're looking at here in New York. And I wonder, one, if you have any advice about securing it. I'm curious as to how you convinced or persuaded the IG to do the report. And then in the final product, did you find it useful, and in what ways?
Well, like I said, it's been about 4 years of organizing at a citywide level. So it's been like at the county. So for the cook, there was also a coalition push at the county and the state. So here in Chicago, there's different databases. There's the state one, there's the county one, and there's the city one. So part of that, there was such a push, and the lawsuit. So we were part of a class action lawsuit saying that we wanted to do it with a gang database and suing the city of Chicago for the impact that it had with people. I being one that's impacted family, somebody else who could who was denied a job, other people. So it was different cases of people that have been impacted by being designated into the gang database. So I think part of it, there was such a push. It was an election year, right? So there was a lot of strategies of going at a different level, state, county, and city. So it was not only the lawsuit, right? There was an ordinance being pushed at the city level with the city council. There was legislation being pushed at the state level, and there was legislation being pushed at the county level, which I think brought to the point as one of, I guess their outs are saying like, we're giving you some stuff, was doing this inspector general review of the gang database. Which, and then it also showed us that the school CPS and the gang and CPD are working really closely together. And for us, that was really crucial. That was part of the information we needed, because we knew that the police in schools, because we have processing centers, even before there were SROs, we have processing centers, like Imani said, children are handcuffed, taken out, that was the source of a lot of our children being put in the gang database, was the school. And they were for reasons like, saying shit. That was one of our kids, right? She got pissed, so she kicked something, she said shit. That was enough for her to have police interaction. Once the police interaction started, then there's the contact card, which they analyze based on where you live, blah, blah, blah. So that kind of unfolds all this BS that a child has to go through because at school, she said shit.
Thank you.
Right.
I got one more question. Babe Howe, just for all of you watching, Professor Babe Howe shared the Chicago IG report in the chat box, so make sure you pull that out and check that out. We are gonna open it up to the full group. My last question to you, Gaete, and your team, is this is happening in New York. What we're hearing for you sound very, very similar and familiar. We know that this is happening in other places, other cities throughout the United States, like LA. And I wonder if you guys have been thinking about this from the national perspective. And while you may not have the capacity, if we were to start a national coalition, where do you see the fight happening? Who are our targets on the national level?
Yeah, and that's something we've been really thinking about. But right now, like, you know, you've been to Blocks Together. We're small, very much neighborhood, right? So our primary focus was really ensuring that we knew at least what our community where was at. And I really think at the national level, we more of us was saying, how do we connect with other folks that are going through this, right? How do we, because we don't have that answer, because we've been so focused on the local level, and we just even like, especially even so much more focused on schools, getting police out of schools and defunding the police in schools. So for us, it's really about, and that's what we talked about, really expanding with other cities that are, and learning how it looks there, right? Because there's a lot of similarities in the way it looks, but and the strategies are going to change, but how is it that we learn from each other? And that's kind of where we're at right now. We haven't really thought about how do we move nationally. We're first thinking about how do we connect with other folks on a national level, learn from them, and then kind of connect and figure out what's the best strategy to move forward as a national entity.
Thank you. You'll have to forgive me, young lady, but I do want to give you the final word before we transition. So go ahead and remind me of your name, and if there's anything you want to add.
Oh, it's Imani.
Imani. There we go.
Yeah, it's Imani. I don't really.
What are you going to be kicking off? What we hired you?
I mean, I am the research. I got hired on as the new resource coordinator for Sustainable Community Schools Initiative, working with Blocks Together, working with my old elementary school, Cameron Elementary. So working with that, I'm going to be kicking back off all those youth committees again here at Blocks Together, the gang database committee, teaching them know your rights, getting youth back involved into political education, because God bless me and Blocks Together blessed me with all my political education. Unfortunately, the schools don't do it. So I know I want to give it back to the youth, so I get them riled up just like I was, and we get back into marches, and we get back into like linking with New York, because we used to have conference calls with people from New York and other states, and I used to go to DC, and we used to do all these really fun things, and really I got all the way up to Arnie Duncan and was like sitting in front of his face. So I want to get that back again so we can start thinking and asking these questions, because that is a really good question, and I don't have the answers for it, but I know that you do. Like, I know they do. I know they know exactly what needs to happen. So I want them to give us the answer, and I get them riled back up and just give them all the resources I can and let them fly.
Thank you so much. And I am definitely going to hold you to that. Our coalition definitely wants to partner, and maybe we can do some trainings together. We are all on Zoom now. So I'd love to partner with you to do some trainings.
Yes, let's go. I'm ready for that.
All right, so let's open it up. We've given you guys a ton of information. We've heard from Professor Johanna Fernandez about the history, how groups, powerful organizations like the Black Panthers and the Young Lords were doing amazing work and were miscategorized. We heard from Afrika, Vidal, and Kraig about how they personally have been impacted. We've learned that this is happening all across the country. As you digest all of this information, what is coming to your mind? Do you have some questions? This is now a time for us to open up and hear from you all. And if you have any questions for any of our speakers. Don't be shy, people. Tell me what, anyone, just tell me what was the aha moment for you in this meeting? Was there anything that stood out that you weren't aware of, or that really made you raise your eyebrow?
They've been in the school since '68.
That was you talking, Caro?
Oh, I'm sorry. I was just sharing with Imani what the professor wrote.
Okay.
On the chat. Sorry.
Okay. Anyone? I'm gonna start picking on folks. Forgive me. Is that Daniela? Is that how I pronounce your name? Garcia, I think your last name is.
Yeah. No.
Are you able to speak? No. All right. I'm gonna go on to Is that Miles? Miles Ephraim? Are you able to speak?
Daniela said she's muted.
Who?
Daniela's muted. You gotta unmute her.
Oh, sorry.
Oh, no, I think I'm unmuted now.
Okay.
Anyway, I think the aha moment for me was just listening to everyone's, particularly to Kraig and Africa's stories, hearing how they have been impacted by the gang database. I think that taught me a lot to understand the challenges these communities are facing. And also, Imani, Caro, thank you for sharing your stories as well. And if I had a question for you, I would like to ask, what are your next steps? I know you've been working a lot, you've mentioned you've been working and organizing for 4 years. So what are the next steps? What you say you don't believe that a lot of the changes that have been said that will be done won't happen. So what are you thinking of doing now? What are the next steps for you and also for other of the individuals who have shared their stories? I would be interested in listening to what that case looks like in New York as well, but thank you.
Sure, thank you. I love that question, Caro.
Well, we have been doing too, because also with the COVID, we had to really look, it was also with over-policing, it became even more over-policing in our communities. So it was right now, we're really at a point where we're really coming together and strategizing. We're continuing to fight to do away with the gang database. A reform of the gang database is not a win. You know, we know how this tool has been used as a racist tool to continue to criminalize our communities. So they can reform this, but it's poison. We want to get rid of it, right? So we're not stopping with you tweaking it a little bit because there's no assurance that you're still not going to use, that it's still going to be inadequate, incorrect, and it's been proven to not be a tool to reduce crime. So why do we need it? Why is so much money being spent in that? So for us, is to continue, and especially through our organizing, through our economic justice, is how are we reinvesting in our tax dollars into our community? So part of us utilizing that as investors into this city, we want to reallocate how money is being allocated. So part of our strategy is a couple, kind of like within the schools, right? So we do school-based work, is really pushing to get police officers out of school. So right now we're proving that we don't need police officers in our schools. What we need is more social services, more wraparound services. So part of our strategies has been to reallocate that funding that is being used for surveillance and policing us.
If I can add, I think our biggest next step for right now, specifically where we're at, is kind of like the healing part of it. It's kind of just going back to that basic, like building that community again and like healing from these wounds that have been caused from the poison, because we can't really move forward if everybody's still stuck on like, they're coming at me this way, so I can't even turn around yet and like fight that battle. So I'm taking a step back to kind of step back and like do that healing part with my youth and like figure that out and do healing with my families. And now when I get them healed and I understand them now as a force, we can move forward because there's no longer a fight happening behind us. I can focus on what's in front of us.
Amen, sister.
Right, amen to that. Powerful. Josmar, I know that we're going to get into some of our next steps, but did you want to weigh in as far as New York or anyone else from New York?
Actually, I think we got a couple of hands raised. We got India, Kira, and Anthony. And Anthony can probably speak a little bit about the New York City stuff.
All right. Miles, I did pick on you and then we went back. So since I picked on you, I wanted to see if you actually do want to talk.
There we go. Now we're unmuted. I'm a parent. We're parents, and we haven't seen our son in about 7 months. And the impact of this meeting is, it's inspiring to see the vitality of this coalition and all the thought that's gone into it. And it's comforting. It's been a long 7 months since we've seen him, and we're glad that we have some allies in our fight to get him out of detention. So thank you for that. Rose had a question, actually. You want?
Yes, I had a question. How do you find out if you're on this gang database?
Is the question, how do you find out if you are on the gang database?
Yes.
All right, who wants to take that one?
I got it. Yeah, so currently right now, at Legal Aid Society, while part of the coalition, what we've done was create what we call the 4-year self-campaign in New York City. The 4-year self-campaign is part of the Freedom of Information Law, where folks can actually sign in and request any information directly from NYPD as it pertains to your involvement on the gang database itself. And I will be transparent. Unfortunately, right now, we're still fighting them for that information. What they've been doing is trying to be very secretive about what they've been housing, and they've been giving the attorneys who's been filing for these requests a hard time of obtaining it. And I actually want to pass it over, if it doesn't mind, to our attorney, Anthony Posada.
Yep, I was just going to call on him, so perfect.
Hefe. Sorry, on the spot, brother.
Thank you all. Can you hear me?
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
All right, perfect. So I first want to thank everybody for joining this important conversation, for everybody who worked to organize it, and for people joining from across the states, especially the voices from Chicago and the mothers. The point of the demise of the Black family is not lost on us, because here it's the same demise that we're witnessing across our own families, and it's that same targeting that needs that healing so that we can stay connected and grounded, so that we can keep moving forward. About how we get labeled and how we get noticed, we're far away from that here in New York, very far away. So in other states, notice exists, but as others have mentioned in this conference, due process is not even a thing that we're trying to aim for, as brothers like Kraig and Afrika and others have stated in their own paths. It's been something that it didn't even happen for them. They just, the net was put over them, the label existed, and then the charges dropped the same way that Vidal mentioned. And so I just want to make that point across, but again, it's been great to just listen in and see the love. And I just want to also ask, what can youth from NYC or other organizations do to support and connect with the work happening in Chicago and with the families there, so that together all families are caring for one another?
Yes. Go ahead, you got this one.
No, I was just saying, because we're doing, it's like the village keepers. We have this idea and this basis foundation around like a village keeper. So that's exactly that idea that he was saying, is like we're taking care of one another, and it's not just within our city, it's having these key people that can reach out across states. And village keepers, it's like that idea of like it takes a village to raise a child. So it's like we need to continue that like bonding and building those bridges, because you know there's always this long side feels, oh, I'm from Chicago, oh, I'm from New York. It's like, honey, the system ain't made for us either way, so we might as well just join together.
And part of the village keepers is really having people know their rights, setting their own safety plans, learning how to do, like that's why we want you to do the cop watch and all that. So it's really around everybody in the neighborhood has to be part of the fight. Like the 80-year-old lady that's on the porch, when you see somebody harassing the police. So it's really around really engaging everybody in our Village Keepers initiative, which is really for us to take care of ourselves. It's redefining security and safety in our communities.
Thank you. I'm going to take these last 60 seconds to get our last two people whose hands were raised. I'm going to start with you, India, and then next is you, Kara. Please forgive me if I'm mispronouncing your name. I'm just going to ask you to repeat it when you start talking. But go ahead, India. You have the mic.
Hi, thank you. Thank you to the panelists so much for your remarks. And I probably should have introduced myself a little bit earlier. So I'm a law professor at Delaware Law School, and I teach critical race theory and criminal procedure. And just hearing people's experiences, the first thing that stuck to me is like, this sounds so unconstitutional and so problematic. But as you know, Professor Howell pointed out, and many of you have pointed out, you know, the work really needs to start on the ground with organizing. So in terms of, another opportunity for collaboration in San Diego, I know they're organizing a conference focused on gang law and thinking about policies and solutions to deal with the gang database. And so I know you've mentioned LA a few times, and of course New York and Chicago, but also San Diego. There's a lot of organizing happening there, as I'm sure other places around the country, but there in particular, they're trying to organize something for next year around July.
Thank you so much for sharing. If there's any links or anything you can share, please put that in the chat box. And please make sure if you haven't put your contact information, we'd love to follow up with you on this. Kira, you have the mic. Did I say that right? Forgive me.
Yeah, it's Kira. First off, thank you so much for everyone for putting this on, putting together this meeting and sharing the personal stories is really informative and moving. But my question was actually just how to get in touch with some of the speakers. Specifically, I'd like to speak to Carolina about Chicago. But if it's best if I just put my email address in the chat and someone could connect us if that's possible, or I don't want to make her share her email address if she's not comfortable with it.
Sure, I'm actually gonna expand that request and say, right, that we are trying to build community here, and we don't want to be the police of access to one another. So if you are comfortable, anyone on this group is comfortable with sharing their name and their email address so that folks can continue this conversation after this meeting, I definitely encourage you to, as Josmar said, and we'll repeat later on, we're going to do more of these meetings. So we definitely want to stay in touch and encourage you all to stay in touch with each other as well.
Thank you.
With that, thank you all so much for your questions. I'm going to close this portion of the program and hand it over to Josmar to close us out.
Great, thank you. And if you can bring up the slides to just talk a little bit about next steps, but I also just wanted to thank Marquis, Victor, Germain, Christian, Afrika, Vidal, Kraig, Carolina, Imani, everyone who was a part, Professor Fernandez, everyone who was a part of helping put this initial conversation together. As I mentioned before, we are working to put together a series of webinars and forums like this so we can continue to unpack. There's a lot of pieces here. There's legal pieces. There are pieces about families that I think we could also unpack. There is a lot that I think this issue speaks to, and so we'll announce a series of webinars and forums going forward, probably virtual for the time being. So if you're interested in staying in contact with us, please add your email list to the chat box, or you can send it to me privately if you prefer, and we'll add you to our email chain. We will be getting in contact with people, and we'll also be launching a website soon, so we'll send news and updates on all of that. Also, we wanted to highlight the important work that Chicago had with the IG's report there. We want to encourage people to get in contact with the Inspector General's office here, particularly if they have insight and stories that they're comfortable sharing, so we can really really show kind of the impact this is having on people's lives. So on the screen, there's some contact information if people want to get in contact with the Inspector General's office here locally. We also want you to tweet or post your stories. If you thought of anything after tonight, you can use the hashtag Erase the Database NYC. I know there was a great Erase the Database campaign in Chicago that we were all watching and learning from. So we want to do the same thing here to spread the word in our communities and through social media if need be. Because of COVID right now, a lot of this stuff has to be done virtual. So if you can tweet or post questions or reactions from tonight. As I mentioned, the website's coming soon. So we will announce that on our either through our hashtags or through our email lists. And then we wanted to just say for the immediate future, we have a rally coming up actually in 2 days, this Saturday, in support of a family of a young father in the Bronx who was brought up on federal RICO charges last year. and we've been following his case and trying to help and support him and his family as much as we can. I think Miss Murray was on earlier, but she may have jumped off. Is Miss Murray here? No, she's not on. But we wanted to encourage people who are comfortable still participating in in-person things to attend this rally on Saturday in front of the U.S. Attorney's Office downtown. What we want to do is connect these gang prosecutions that are increasing in New York City, specifically the ones that they're giving to the federal prosecutors. We want to connect them to the wrongful convictions history that, in New York City, and how a lot of what happens in RICO and conspiracy allows some of the biggest injustices that I've ever seen to happen in the courtroom because of association, because of guilt by association, more specifically. So that rally will happen, and we'll have some people who were wrongfully convicted themselves. One person who was locked up for 23 years and he got out a few years ago, who will be speaking alongside with us as well. And that information is right up there, Saturday at 2:30. And then lastly, I think we just want to close and just thank everyone for taking their time out to spending their evening with us, talking and also connecting. We want to just, again, encourage everybody to leave their information with us so we can keep talking and we can keep building and we can keep organizing and growing out. And I want to, again, thank all the organizers who made this happen, and thank all the speakers who also took their time out. All right, and with that said, anyone, any closing comments or anything want to take us out?
Nobody wants to leave. I'm joking. I do want to say to the professor, thank you so much, Professor Fernandez. I think you gave me a lot of insight as to the history, and I have not read your book yet, and I need to. But I really, 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 really appreciated that story, because I think historically we have to understand that not only are they criminalizing Black and brown folks, but they're criminalizing a culture. You know what I mean? Especially like, and I will just use a story, and I always say it because it breaks my heart a lot, is that I don't know how many of you guys seen, maybe like 2 years ago, there was a Facebook video of an African-American teacher that was having handshakes with all of his 4th grade students. And I remember after about 3 months, the video was taken down. It was all over Twitter, people were talking smack about it. And then 5 months after that, there was a Caucasian teacher, female, that did the exact same thing, and it went viral. It went viral. I can't find a Black teacher's video anywhere, and I've been looking for it, and I talk about this all the time. So I always say, you know, what's good for the goose is good for the gander, but it's a culture that they're criminalizing. And what Professor was talking about earlier, just the history of us, just the oppressive nature of Black and brown folks, that resonated with me. So that takeaway for me is big, especially as long for the years I've been doing this work. And it's disheartening. And I think conversations like this space, this platform that we give each other, just being able to share information to figure out how we can fight together, is what's, like Imani said, I believe I said her name right, Imani said earlier, it does take a village. It truly takes a village. And right now, our village is everything we have, every resource we can tap into, whether it's a mayor, whoever it is, IG's office, whatever works, we need to get that together. So again, thank everybody for being here. That's my piece.
Great. Thank you guys. And please stay in contact. We'll send out information, and also, you know, we'll have a website coming out as well soon, which will have a ton of information. We have videos, we have short PSA videos that we produce. We'll actually put them in the chat right now. And we'll get in contact with you if you left us your email information. All right. And thanks again.
I mean, we're hanging out. I mean, it looks like folks want to talk more. I'm definitely not rushing out. So you can hang out, and if you got some more things you want to explore and talk about, we are officially over. I'm still kind of curious, Kivante, forgive me again if I pronounce your name wrong, but you started off sharing your story about the crew that you had when you were in high school. I wonder, in listening to that story and then hearing what is taking place in New York, what are your thoughts? Okay, somebody muted you. I unmuted you, and then they muted you again. Let me try this again. All right. There you go.
Great. Yeah, thank you for giving me the opportunity to share that story. It took me way, way back. Yeah, from what I've been learning about the designation of crews in New York and kind of the widespread use of crews to identify with and just to kind of hang out with, you know, it does trouble me if there were to be some kind of system put in place that would make that, you know, criminalize that sort of behavior. Because certainly I know growing up where I grew up, which was not New York, you know, we never thought twice about doing anything that would have been criminal. It was just us and our friends hanging out together. So if, you know, the essential males or being a member of that group would have put me on some particular database, that most certainly would have been troubling to myself and my family.
Thank you. You know what? Just because we share the same name, I'm going to go ahead and pick on you, Brother Marquis Bradshaw. What are your thoughts? I think I might need to unmute you too. Did we lose you? No, we didn't. Let me unmute you. All right, I think I unmuted you. I'm just going to go ahead and unmute everyone. But this really is an open discussion, so I'm not rushing out. If anyone has anything they want to share, I am unmuting everyone.
Hey Marquis, this is Jennifer. So I live in North Dakota and I'm former law enforcement, and now I've moved more into an advocacy role to help people kind of fight the injustice that I've witnessed firsthand. One of the hardest things that I'm finding in the area that I'm in is North Dakota. It seems to be there's more of an issue with the criminal justice process itself, like from what's, you know, the really deep-seated relationships that prosecutors have with judges, right down to the public defenders that are assigned, where they're just more apt to just get to that plea and just dismiss and never to be seen again. And one of the challenges that I run into in North Dakota is kind of fighting that mindset. Like everybody, you say the word criminal and everybody just says, okay, that's a criminal. Oh my gosh, let's lock him up and we're done, and end of story.
Can I push a little bit on that?
Yeah, please.
So this is Anthony. Jennifer, wouldn't there also be a policy that pushes the arrest of those people into the hands of the prosecutors and the judges?
Absolutely, hands down. I think they're all
so that policy comes from above, and it dictates the numbers as well, and the labeling and every other part. So it is all interconnected.
Oh, absolutely. Well, I think the question is how do we start undoing that specifically in the Midwest? You know, we have, you know,
it's the same everywhere.
Right. I think for our area, more specifically in like North Dakota, Montana, South Dakota area, what I'm kind of seeing that tri-state area in general is everybody here is so like, recently we've kind of had crime go up. Now, whether we've actually have had crime go up or if it's just more being promoted in the news or not is probably somewhat to question. But what I'm seeing just as a general consensus in my community alone and with people that I have conversations with is the more our community grows, you know, I'm trying to think of how to say this.
I mean, if I may, first of all, thank you for coming, because it's fascinating to have you on here being a former law enforcement. And it's brave, right, to say that you went through it and, you know, you see, right, you realize the harm that they were doing. And you know, often the conversations that we have with our allies is that, what's your role, right? If all of these issues are happening in our community, and you see them and you want to do something, like it pains you so much that you want to do something, we have to think about where is it that we have the greatest leverage, the greatest influence. And so, yes, you can come into the Black and brown communities or even the poor white communities and organize those people and tell them, come on, let's go and let's fight the system. But you have the ear of your former fellow police officers. And organizing in those spaces, I think, are just as crucial as organizing in communities of color or poor white faces, right? If we can organize the people who are doing harm and convince them to stop doing harm, then that makes us even stronger as a coalition, right? We all have a role in this battle, and we all have proximity, some way, shape, or form to the people who are causing us harm. And that's part of the reason why this coalition exists, to bring all of our skills, all of our access, all of our privileges, all of our experiences together to really think holistically about how do we beat this? Because the reality is, it's hitting us from every corner. We heard about how it's hitting us in public housing, in our homes, how it's hitting us in schools, how it impacts our ability to get a job. We have to fight it equally on every single front.
I agree with that. I think in this area specifically, it's so prominent in their way of thinking, and from politically down to how things have been run, like jails, let's say, for instance, like our county jail here, where we're at, you know, the more people you have incarcerated, the more money you get. And you're taking that away from schools and stuff. Well, you know, that, okay, so the solution there would be, okay, let's put a cap on that and say, no, this is what we're going to do instead, and put money back into our public schools or whichever, right? But the problem that I see is, since we've made everything for profit at the end of the day, where's the incentive to get them to change that? Because unfortunately, I don't feel everybody wants a better community. And that's kind of been the reality I've seen, is that not everybody cares if we have a better community. They just assume everybody needs to make good decisions, and as long as you don't screw up, you're not going to end up in jail, so what do you have to worry about? And so it's fighting a really deep-seated ideology and a lot of myths. And the more people that we see move into our community that are Black specifically, I mean, everybody just assumes right away, they're from Chicago, they're in a gang, this is what they're doing, you know, which of course, most educated people, let's say, and I don't even mean to say educated, but, you know, unfortunately, that seems to be kind of the trend on some level, is, you know, they can remove that and say, okay, well, no, that's not the case. You know, these people could be from anywhere, and like, if you look at the people that are currently incarcerated here, for instance, the majority are white, but nobody knows that. Nobody looks at that. They don't actually care, because all they're focused on are the Black people who moved to our community. And I mean, they didn't even necessarily move here. They could have been here, you know, they could have been raised and born here. And so it's pretty funny, because you're just fighting this really deep-seated ideology. As for working with the police here and stuff, I've worked with them. I know their mindset. A lot of them, I mean, it's a good old boys club, and you're either with them or you're against them. If you have compassion, ooh, you're a bad person. That means you sympathize. They don't understand that there's a difference between sympathy and compassion, you know, and, you know, like, it's really difficult to fight that mindset. And so, of course, for somebody like me, I'm like, oh man, I'm not doing this, you know, like, I can't be around this because I don't think the same way.
Can I add something?
That's trying to do it when, you know, you get to hang out in the locker room with these guys. I mean, if it's that much of a battle, right? Again, right, it's about proximity. And no, you're not going to be able to unplug all, but if there's anyone who have the access to it.
Can I say something as well? And Jennifer brought up a great point, and it kind of resonates with stuff that we were saying throughout the webinar this evening. You know, when I talk about it, that cultural criminalization, right? Like she just pointed out, and when she first said South Dakota, I'm like, Dakota? Who the hell's committing crimes in Dakota, right? But now, like, really, when you think about it, and when we talked about New York City's gang database, for instance, and again, from the conversations we've had with our allies across the nation, it's one and the same. More than 97% of each of these databases across the nation, even in Seattle, Washington, it's the same thing. We know that there's Caucasian offenders or offenders that's in gangs that's non-color or not black and brown, but they're not on it. You know, people are purposely turning their attention elsewhere because they're not of color, or because folks are of color. So yes, when I said statement earlier about what Professor said as far as the history, I do think our resources means a lot more, because the folks who are being impacted, the folks who are in jail right now and facing these issues, facing these conspiracy charges, who's gonna help them, right? And it's not just folks who look like me. It can't be. It can't just only be us. But until we change how folks view people, like you said, Jennifer, there's folks where you don't even know if they moved to Dakota or if they live there. But it doesn't matter, you know, because they don't really play a role. And I kind of want to mention something that someone said in the chat, which was amazing, from Elizabeth. She wrote, there are no incentives to change the system that benefits the stakeholders who create it. Unfortunately, it's up to the people who are getting burnt by the system to change it. And she's right, because had we not heard these stories like Miles and Rose shared earlier about their son, about Kraig and Afrika and Vidal, these are black and brown people that's sharing their stories, and now folks are saying that's terrible. But these are the same folks that's doing it. Oh, excuse me, not you guys, but in general, you know, we've had meetings after meetings after meetings, year after year after year, and it's like nobody cares because the system's running perfectly. We bring up the Proud Boys in NYC. There was a video out here of them brutally beating people up in the middle of Manhattan, and no one even got locked up, you know? So it's just that cultural difference as people, the folks on the ground, like young lady Imani said, it takes a village. We have to understand how to take care of ourselves and change the narrative. If we don't do that, it's going to continue to happen.
So where I come from, like, okay, so for me specifically, you know, like my story is kind of interesting. I was in the process of becoming an officer, and I'm married, and I become an officer, I'm working, and my husband actually gets brought up on a federal indictment. He had been out of a very active gang for 3 years, and now he's sitting in federal prison. So there's a twist for you, you know. And well, people didn't really they didn't associate me with that at all, and they still don't. And that's great and everything, because I had nothing to do with it, let alone I also knew that he left that lifestyle and stuff. And I guess, you know, the closer he gets to serving all of his time and coming back out, you know, then I know that it will impact my life more. And that's fine. Don't care still. I'm good with that, you know. But I think at the same time, you know, it's like you look at what judges are doing. And so, for instance, like compassionate release filings due to COVID and things like that, and them denying it. Are they denying it because they don't want to do it, or they really believe the answers that they're denying it for? Or are they doing it because they don't want those people coming back into that community so soon? And I believe that it's more that they don't want the people coming back to their communities, and they're hoping that these relationships fall and break down, and, you know, then it's all done and we can keep this perpetual cycle going. And so, like, even when I'm looking at kids around here that I work with who are starting kind of at the beginning of forming their own gangs, which is typically just a rap group, whatever, and then, oh my gosh, they get in trouble, whole crap, you know, like they stole a bag of Cheetos, oh man, they're just bad people, you know. And so it's like you look at that, and how do you intervene, and how do you, because I think it's what needs to happen here is that somehow we need to be communicating with, you know, whether it's judges and prosecutors, and changing their mindsets.
Yeah.
And I really believe that that would work and be great. But when you have judges who aren't all on the same page across districts, across circuit courts, across, you know, the board in general, who holds that accountable then?
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
so I think that's, for me, that's what I want to know is, how can we get to those people and then have them have to all have a standard of some sort, which, don't get me wrong, a standard is definitely bad, but the rules either apply to everyone or they don't apply at all.
Right. No, you're absolutely, I think you're absolutely right. I also think, so I think that there were two main things that I wanted also to raise. I think one is just sort of bringing in, the organizer in me has to bring in capitalism, right? And how capitalism uses racism as a tool. And I bring that up to say, while there's no comparison between, what whites and people of color have gone through in this community, but oftentimes poor whites and African Americans and people of color have the same targets in terms of the changes that we need to see, right? Oftentimes, and I'm sure you have witnessed this, there are situations, cases, laws, all types of scenarios in which poor white people are voting against their own interests because it means this is how it's going to impact Black people. And something so good for you can be bad because it will uplift Black folks, right? So, like, I say that again, right, to understand that at least I recognize that oftentimes we are standing in the same, excuse my French, shit together. And the best thing for us to do is to come together and, again, figure out where do we have the most leverage and where do we have the most access, right? It could be that you live right next door to a judge. Why are you coming all the way to the Bronx? Why are you coming all the way to Brooklyn? Why are you coming to New York, where if you can just go next door and talk to that judge for a couple of minutes, that might make all the difference in the world.
Oh, see, like, it doesn't work like that here. Like, I know all of my neighbors. I know, I probably know at least 3/4 of the entire Fargo-Moorhead population. And Fargo-Moorhead, Fargo is like the biggest place in North Dakota, for instance. And you can have these conversations, but like, for instance, and this is kind of funny because like one of my friends, she's in San Diego, and she was reading off the ballot and the voting ballot. And, the amount of people that she gets to choose from, there's only one option on ours, like for judges, like you have one person, there's nobody competing against them, and when you look at it, like even our federal court here specifically, it's all the same judges. They all went to the same school. They all are very conservative Republicans. That's what you're fighting against in the Midwest. And how do you change that? And that I don't know. And unfortunately, it's such a, like, everybody here, and I don't believe that that's the case, like, in the whole nation, but a lot of people here, there's no one fighting for incarcerated. There's no one fighting for their rights in general. Everything is very that old mindset of like, hey, stay out of it. It's not your problem. It's not your problem. And
Black people are doing great, right? And that's why I say capitalism, right? Capitalism will have everyone making choices against their own interests.
But I also think, like, even in my case, like, I'm cautiously loud, I guess, let's say, because I mean, like, what would it take for them just to wrap me up in a Fed case, knowing who I'm married to and stuff, like, everybody's working within these perimeters here.
No, but I mean, I'm glad you're raising that because truth be told, that's the reality for organizers, people of color all across the country. We are bringing these conversations and challenging those very individuals, those decision makers. And if it's difficult from someone who lives within the beehive, imagine someone who's coming out, someone who's trying to tap into that group to convince them. And we have seen, I mean, you can go to Ferguson and I can tell you about all of the organizers of color who have lost their lives in the aftermath of the uprisings behind the killing of Michael Brown. So when we go out there and we decide to be organizers in the same way that police officers preach that they're putting their lives on danger, that is the sacrifice that organizers are making, right? There's no getting around it, right? So again, if it's challenging for you to do it, it is 10 times harder for us to do it. And if you truly want to be a part of this battle, then we need you, right, to fight within the beehive, right? As difficult as that may be, it's harder for us. And you have the greatest chances of making an impact in that area.
So, guys, I just need to say my computer's gonna run out of juice soon. And also, I think if my computer logs off, I think the Zoom will shut down as well. So Let me just say thanks to everybody who stayed on with us. Rose, Miles, thank you guys so much for joining us. We'll definitely be in contact soon. Christian, Marquis, and everyone who helped organize this, thank you guys so much. And Elizabeth, Jennifer, and Yarina, thank you guys so much for staying on with us. It was great talking with you guys from across the country. And yeah, we'll do this again very soon, and we'll send the details out to everybody.
Okay.
All right.